should be currently focused on trying to avert a famine, which looks more and more likely. We have humanitarian workers who are now living off animal feed. We have children drinking from puddles. And as we saw from those scenes, the medical situation is at an absolutely critical point. And the reality is the international community has had to move to a maritime corridor because of the failure to open enough land routes, to open them for enough hours, for enough days, or to allow sufficient aid through. And this maritime route, we are still looking at a 50-hour journey to get boats across. And there are many questions I have around security on the beaches once the aid arrives and how the aid is going to get moved around Gaza. So we really are in a dreadful state.
And yet Israel consistently says it is not impeding aid moving through to Gaza. Now, you've just returned from the Middle East. Is that true in your view?
No, I'm afraid it's not. And I had an interesting exchange of views with the Israeli spokesperson on Twitter this weekend, which resulted in him having to delete some of his tweets. One where he claimed that if we were to test them, they could let through another 100 trucks a day. Another claiming that the UN had asked them not to allow aid deliveries on Saturdays. This is not the briefing that I received from the UN. And it's quite clear from Lord Cameron, it's clear from Biden, it's clear from the Germans, the French, you name it, that everyone believes the Israelis could be doing more.
But it's equally true, when you mention Lord Cameron, that the Israelis do not appear to be listening to him, the UK government, or the Americans.
I don't disagree with you. And I think these are the kind of conversations I've been having in Egypt and Saudi Arabia the last week. They've said to us, why aren't the Israelis listening to you? Well, the reality is we do have to recognise that the UK and the US, we cannot just force our allies to do things because we want them to do so. That is not the situation in which we are. Netanyahu has his own political interests and his own desires in terms of his future, and those are shaping the decisions that he is making.
I mean, we have no ceasefire, potential flashpoints now around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Despite glimmers of optimism over the last couple of weeks that this ceasefire would materialise, things seem to be returning to a very bleak point. Do you think there's now also a renewed danger of this spreading once again?
So look, Biden and the UK have been clear that we don't want to see an offensive within Rafah. I don't see how that could be undertaken in any way that would in any way preserve or protect civilian life. And so I think that remains a red line. We still have to remain optimistic of a truce. We need Hamas to agree to that truce. And my message is, while I was in the region, whether we need Hamas to come to the table and to agree to that truce. We have to hold on to that hope, because without hope, you can achieve nothing. But we also need to make sure that we plan for failure, which is exactly what we're seeing with this maritime humanitarian corridor, but also that we plan for, if a truce does happen, how quickly we can surge that aid in, because I'm not confident there's an international relief plan being put in place as there needs to be should we get to that point of truce, which all the Arab nations want to see happen.
I mean, yesterday President Biden was being criticised for slightly mixed messages over whether there were or weren't red lines. You know, he seemed to fix on a position that there shouldn't be thousands more innocent civilians killed, but at the same time he would never leave Israel. Is that a problem?
So I think there has to be a nuance in this where we recognise that Israel has a right to self-defence, and we all want to see a situation, a future in which Israel's security is guaranteed alongside a Palestinian state. However, in that right of self-defence, we have to recognise it is not limitless. And where our friends and allies cross that line, where they start to breach international humanitarian law, not only do we have a responsibility to call that out, but it also causes the UK to change our actions and change our behaviours. And you saw that when we saw the Israeli minister come to the UK recently, where David Cameron essentially said in his statement that he believed that the withholding of humanitarian aid could be a breach of international law. I think that within the Foreign Office, they have concluded that it has been a breach of international law, alongside the bombing of the British Medical Aid for Palestine charity, where we were very lucky that the 4 British nationals, the 4 doctors inside, were not killed.